Now we want to talk about how do we project in our minds what the lake will be like and what kind of effects that we and our actions might have. And we've kind of bounced around a lot of those things today. And David's going to take a little bit of time and talk about what we bring in, what we leave behind, and things we add and the things we do.
So this really is going to be shifting gears a little bit. I got that a little too dark. I always figured you could also title this, so what are some of the impacts to Bear Lake that man causes? And I don't expect this to be a monologue. What do you guys come up with? Trash. We used two biggest ones I came up with were recreation and irrigation. We used it as a reservoir. So what was I? Trash. I thought I was going to be real clever and get into, so how big a problem can this be? And back in 2002, USGS did these way cool studies of Bear Lake. One of them was to produce this map. Well, it's basically already been in 3 other presentations so far. Of interest, though, is, I mean, the lake, the high water mark is clear up in here because the lake was 15.5 feet low back then. The lake shore comes down in here. So you can, this is you could talk a long time about what this graph actually shows, but for what I want to depict, it shows the scope of the problem. And I am going to digress a little bit here because twice on this we mention UP and LDATM. And as a couple people have mentioned, most things up here are reference to Utah Power and Light Datum. And I mean, I know one developer who walked out on the beach and goes, I can go clear out to here, look at this. And Conley, what is this statement from? Is that that's the Bear River Compact, I think?
One of the engineer manager's reports, I think.
So what it comes up to is it's 2.75 feet less than if you walked out there, your surveyor who's referencing USGS datum, mean sea level kind of thing. So you got to be careful what you say around here for an elevation. So getting back to that bathymetry chart, and I borrowed this from Conley, and Conley already updated us today on what that means. But it's pretty crazy to think that there's 18 square miles of exposed surface down there if the lake's at low pool. And what was it? 9.25 square miles are exposed. No, we're going to be covered up.
Well, yeah, that's from the low. So
okay.
Halfway there already.
So those are some big numbers. And that gives you an idea of what's the scope of this problem. Obviously when the lake is low, there's a lot of area to be managed. And conversely, when the lake is high, we get to figure out what we're going to do the next time it drops, which is one of the, I think, the real opportunities of this group getting together. Yes, it's coming up. We can see what 10 years, 11 years of low water has done and all of the vegetation that's being inundated, and we'll see very shortly this summer what happens to it, and maybe, as we heard once, it might take a couple of years to get rid of all that. But it'll give us a chance to see how we can work together on managing this land next time we get that much land exposed. The main topic of this conference is managed by whom and for what, or for whom, for what end. My little part is to introduce to you the things that can invade that exposed land, and I say invade, you could also say grow on, maybe a little harsh. The things that our uses might bring to Bear Lake, and the things that our users or uses leave behind. It's really pretty straightforward. The things, I mean, most of the things that grow out there are the upland plants that normally wouldn't grow out there if it was a constant level. We've got willows and cottonwood trees and grasses and all of the weeds you can think of. A lot of these are good, even though it's temporary habitat for the birds and the wildlife and the amphibians. And I said temporary because once that comes up, that habitat's lost to them. My perspective, Scott. Consider what the lake bed was like when that water first receded. At our property just north of Fish Haven, when the lake goes out, it is a flat, sandy bottom. There is nothing growing on it. If the lake is a constant level, at some point the hardstem bulrushes start growing in some of the cattails. But in front of our place, when the lake goes down, it's sand. After 11 years, it's now got all sorts of weeds. We don't get the kind of vegetation you see along a lot of here, but we do have willows and a lot of weeds. In other places in the lake, when the water goes down, you're either going to have a nice rocky habitat for the fish, or you might have some of the areas where the springs are seeping through, but there's very little growing on it. One of the other things to consider is, and I was hoping Amanda would stick around. I have a couple of comments on her presentation. We really only have a couple of emergent plants growing, the hardstem bulrush and the cattail. Because the lake fluctuates so much, we have very few submergent plants, very few beds of the kinds of, and somebody that's a botanist helped me with some of those things, the duckweed and the stuff that the fish love to swim in and hide in. But because one year the lake's at, what were we, 59.10, and all that's going to be probably, again, I wish Amanda was here, is 10 feet of water, 11 feet of water in Bear Lake make that below the littoral zone? We need to keep this kind of thought in mind. What was it like when it receded? We haven't done a good job of recording that. And I mentioned, what does it look like now? We have an opportunity to start recording that. Take pictures. Let's get some science and observations done on what it's like so that we can work science into how we manage this lake. So there's a lot of normal kinds of weeds, but there's also the noxious weeds and the invasive species. Tamarisk, you saw this picture once before. The Idaho and Utah up there means tamarisk is on both states' noxious weed lists. Utah Forestry, Fire, and State Lands and the Highland CWMA, which is a 5-county cooperative weed management area that actually encompasses both Rich County and Bear Lake County, have been really good about fighting our weeds. It did take us too long to get to Phragmites, and we could talk all day about that, and I'll cover it briefly in just a sec. But back in 1996, when tamarisk first started showing up on the lake, the Boy Scouts helped Bear Lake Watch pass out flyers. The landowners went out and pulled that stuff. And we were doing a really good job of it. Luckily, the lake came up and finished the job for us. But I do know that both Rich County Weed Control and Bear Lake County Weed Control have been out taking out tamarisk. And it's a good thing the lake's coming up because it's getting to be a big problem, and there's a lot of it on the east side of the lake right now. Dyer's Woad, you don't get any pretty pictures of nice little yellow flowers. Most people assume that's an upland weed problem. It is on both states' noxious weed list, and it does love to grow out on Bear Lake. And again, we have a lot of requests that come from either Judy Holbrook at the tourism or the regional commission, or just people that call and say, we're coming up here for a family vacation. What can we do to help? Well, you go pull Dyer's Woad on the beach. And a lot of people have done that. I hope that's not against the law. And I'll talk a little bit about Phragmites. We did get it on the radar too late. I actually think it's one of the things that we're still learning a lot about. One of the things we don't know is how much water this consumes. I'm actually convinced that the reason tamarisk got so popular all of a sudden is because somebody came up with 350 gallons of water a day for a tamarisk plant. And all of a sudden you got all of the state agencies fighting it, you know, and that's good. We don't know how much water Phragmites takes. We do know that it displaces native vegetation. We do know that it takes away some of our recreation area. You don't have to drive. That whole area along the south end of the lake was beautiful, nice sandy beach 5 years ago, 7 years ago at least. So anyway, Phragmites is a problem. Idaho has put it on its noxious weed list. Rich County has. Both Forestry, Fire, and State Lands have done, and Highland CWMA have done quite a bit of treatment for Phragmites. This year would have been interesting anyway because last year Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and Blaine, correct me if I'm wrong, probably treated, well, the whole south end of the lake.
Yeah, it was 5 miles.
5 miles. And the treatment was with glyphosate. I hope I didn't mispronounce that. In Idaho, we treated some area over near Carolyn's, several places in front of Fish Haven, and they used a different chemical called imazapyr. And the treatments were within 3 or 4 days of each other. So it would have been fun to see which chemical worked better. That is all going to be inundated this year, which will be maybe solve another question that Bryce and I have a little personal sort of side bet with is, does inundating it kill it? Last week at a Highland CWMA meeting, the researcher from Utah State, Dr. Karen Kettenring, said, if you will cut it off below the water level so the water can soak into the plant, it will drown it. If you don't cut it off, it doesn't seem to kill it. So this will be a fun year to see a lot of different things.
So if we do have Phragmites in front, what can we do about it? Just cut it at this point?
I think go down and cut it. And maybe we'll get to it by later tomorrow to see if anybody's got a problem with that. Whether you mow it or go cut it with a sickle, I don't know. But, you know, without putting John on the spot tomorrow, you know, we'll get to that tomorrow for sure.
Where did it come from, Dave?
It was introduced from, I think, Europe, brought over as levee control, just like tamarisk was. I guess maybe a couple things I should mention about Phragmites while we're on it. They thought that it spread, oops, wrong backwards. They thought that it spread mostly by these rhizomes, these long runners. Some of the research they've done have found that it will spread prolifically by seed if you get the colonies growing close enough together that they can cross-pollinate. So, you know, here at Bear Lake we've got a lot of isolated colonies, and if we could get to treat those, it would be really good before they get in a mass as dense as down at Utah Lake. So they do spread by seed and by these rhizomes, and the way you tell a difference is anything that's spread by these rhizomes is genetically identical. If you break off a piece of this, where am I? If you break off a piece of this and take it down the beach, it will have the same DNA as that stand right there. If you get a piece that's grown from a seed, it will be genetically different. So I'm going to move on because we'll talk. Yes?
I remember large racks of Phragmites over on Cisco Beach that would wash up in the spring when the lake would freeze, and then the water would shift and shear all the Phragmites off that was standing. So as David's done a very good job about, you know, actively attacking it, I, being a biologist, have a tendency to want to say, just leave things alone, the lake will take care of it. I felt much the same way on tamarisk. They're invasive plants that come into disturbed soils and disturbed areas, disturbed meaning that water is no longer on them. Now you will hear them say many times, and it's a correct statement, that Phragmites, you know, will persist. And all you got to do is go to the refuge at the north end of the lake and these kind of areas, and you'll see Phragmites stands that have been there for years. Water comes up, water goes down, the Phragmites lives. My point is, and it didn't get brought out in the discussion on the littoral zone today, but one of the reasons that Bear Lake has a very poor littoral zone is it is very erosive. Because it has a sand bottom, not a rock and the mud and that type of stuff bottom, when the lake is rough, which it is constantly, both winter, more in the winter and spring than in the summer and fall, the lake crashes and moves tremendous amounts of sand. The comment was made today about, well, you know, you can see the color of the water by North Eden. Well, I can go many times in the summertime and see huge bands of color after a wave event that's just brought up from the lake itself. So what I say about Phragmites is that Phragmites is going to basically disappear from the lake. There'll always be some, there's always been some, but it's not that it's drowning, it's not that it's, you know, dying, it's that it's being uprooted by the lake, and then you'll start to see all of this material wash into shore, as she alluded to. I don't call it muck, I call it some of the best organic fertilizer you can put on your gardens to build your soils and all that other type of stuff. So anyway, that's where David and I are on Phragmites. So I guess we'll see. You won't see bulrushes back in the lake, only at the mouths of the little creeks where the water comes in, and all the folks upstream of those creeks that fertilize. The fertilization will get into the creek, and you will establish growths of cattails there because of the increased nutrients. As you go along the north or the side between Lake Town and Garden City, the hardstem bulrush will come back there. It's been laying dormant for years now, but it will start to come back. So that's good enough. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and I didn't mean to brand all Phragmites evil. I don't think Russian olive is listed on either state's invasive species list. Well, Claudia's going to hand the mic to Blaine.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of treatment at the rest area and also with Parks and Rec on the east side of the lake where we're cutting them and burning them. The county has not identified Russian olive as an invasive. They're a prolific seed source, seeder, and they love moisture.
They're a highly invasive species. They're not just listed on the list.
That's right.
Okay.
Recognized as one, but I can guarantee you that.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, John. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Okay. So some of the things that our recreational uses might bring to Bear Lake, and again, these topics you could go into for a long time. Quagga mussels, zebra mussels. Claudia had a picture of them on an earlier thing. They might live in Bear Lake, they might not. I don't want to try and find out. So I'm really glad that both states have a pretty aggressive program to catch boats that might have them. Could we improve? Probably. What might happen if we got them? Who knows? You could end up with razor-sharp shells on the beach and all of Pacific Corps' hydroelectric stuff downstream clogged with them, and the irrigator's head gates all jammed up. But that's a whole week-long discussion. Eurasian milfoil is a nice feathery looking thing that actually is a submergent plant. Is that right, Bryce? It can grow 12 to 15 feet tall, so anchored on the bottom of the lake to the ceiling. And it looks like this nice feathery little stuff. Idaho has a problem with it up in the northern lakes. They are sending divers down to root it up. It's crazy, the things that they're doing. People have drowned in it because it looks like you can swim across it. You get your legs tangled in it. It's a crazy thing. And it comes in on the boats. And I wrote down Phragmites again because there's some scientific proof with that genetically identical stuff. We have stands of Phragmites in Bear Lake that are identical to stands of Phragmites in Farmington Bay Refuge and Utah Lake. They probably came here on a boat, maybe on a duck hunter's blind, maybe I don't know how else, but to be genetically identical, it has to be a piece of that plant that got here. That's not a popular thing to say around the duck hunting community or even around a lot of other folks, but it's a scientific fact. Okay, the things that our uses can leave behind, and a lot of this is, you know, Claudia mentioned it in the surveys, trash. The one picture she showed earlier of one of the dumpsters down there on the southwest corner of the lake, I am really happy to say that Rich County has really stepped up to the plate. They are emptying the trash containers twice a week now in the summertime, and we haven't had that problem. But we also have a lot of homeowners who take it upon themselves to every Monday morning hop on their four-wheelers and go up and down different stretches of beach to pick up trash. We have 2 or 3 people in Fish Haven that do it. We have some people down near Bear Lake West that do it. We have a whole group of people up on Sweetwater Hill that do it. I'm sure you have people over on the east side that do it. A management problem, but we need to find a way to, you know, it's neat to see people step up to the plate. We even had a discussion this morning on this oil and gas residue and how can you allow cars out on the beach. We obviously didn't come to any conclusions. My feeling is I wouldn't be surprised someday in the future where we don't allow them out there. There are some pretty good reasons to let them, because with the lake so shallow, it's forever to get to the water's edge, at least on this west side, especially up in Fish Haven area. Our contacts at DEQ tell us that a car dripping gas is not really a problem because it evaporates. I'm not sure if they'd run and put that in writing, but that's what they've told us. The oil, you and I all know that's a problem. Just look at the up in Alaska or down there in Louisiana. And I didn't know how to quite say this. I've got a picture that I'm not sure I should show. The pictures of 1,500 cars down on the beach and the porta potties up on the road don't make sense to me. When you got that many people down on the beach and no lines at the porta potties, we're missing the boat and we're causing a problem. So these are a couple of pictures. Those are diapers on the right, and we'll move on. So to be both thought-provoking and to conclude, if you own the land, and I suppose I'm talking to Blaine and Pat on this one, are you responsible for it? Can you delegate that? Can you share that responsibility? I think the reason that you guys see so many people in this room that are interested is because they want to help you. If you provide access to sovereign land, In other words, like, well, like Garden City's doing, they've got a lease to provide access. What are your responsibilities? What are your responsibilities to the state, who owns the land? And the neat thing there is they have a contract. They have a lease that states, this is what you do and this is what I do. What's your responsibility to the public? And how do you balance that with the upland property owner? And I'll sort of come back to vegetation because that was the #1 problem in the survey. I think for the regulators here, again, you've got a lot of people here who are willing to help manage this, and we've got an opportunity with the lake rising to work on something where everybody can work together, and maybe we can, I started this off with, we don't have a lot of science on what happens when the lake goes down. We haven't done a good job of recording that. This is the opportunity to record what happens when it comes back up. But we need to use that. We need to do a better job of that so that we can use science as a basis for our management and regulation. So I'll shut up and turn over the mic to Mitch, unless anybody has any questions. And that's either a really good sign or a really bad one.